Today's Gospel reading is a continuation of Jesus preparing the disciples for their mission to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. First, the disciples are reminded that ministry and engaging with the world as Christians is not about rank, position, or influence. It is not about being top of the class or better than anyone else. The joy or privilege, or the act of boasting that one can have, is simply in the act of having the honour of a personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus also tells the disciples that there is no secret knowledge, there is no exclusive group or individual who has been given greater information. Whatever Jesus has taught them, be it in a private setting or in public ministry, they are to share openly and freely, proclaiming it wherever they can and wherever they go. Of course, the command to be open and transparent is a high value in the world of Jesus' followers, as well as in our world today. Any attempt at secrecy was met with suspicion and distrust. Unlike the scribes and Pharisees who were plotting behind Jesus' back, Jesus urges his followers to be open and transparent, to be open and public. Second, Jesus also warns them that following him will not be pretty. After all, if they are calling Jesus Beelzebul, then they will call and treat his followers as equally meanly or more nastily. Worst case scenario, the disciples could even lose their lives. This statement was not made to dissuade the disciples from following Jesus or to frighten them. Jesus highlights the horrors that await the disciples because by giving name to the suffering to be endured and its causes, he offers the first stage in freeing them from the persistent grip fear and anxiety can have in our lives. Often, the biggest fears and anxieties that we can be confronted with are the unknown. Once you can name the worst thing that can happen, it loses its strength and hold over you. And, should you still choose to enter into the situation, you have chosen to do it. You have chosen to walk in rather than walk away. Fear and anxiety loses its power over you completely when you do so. Jesus continues to describe worst-case scenarios wound together with statements of reassurance and repeatedly calls for the disciples to resist fear. The most important component of reassurance, though, lies in the important relationship that is affirmed between the disciples and Jesus, and through him, God. The statement, "Everyone therefore who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven," should be read in a tone of affirmation and reward, not as a stern warning. After all, imagine being a peasant nobody who will be now, according to Jesus, acknowledged before God in heaven, an act unheard of in that time. At the time of Jesus, only the elites had access to or were acknowledged by the highest authority. Throughout all these trials and tribulations, the disciples are to remain firm in their commitment to Jesus and their mission, even when that mission generates inevitable conflicts, including within their families. The saying, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace but a sword," is crucial. For although Jesus has called his disciples to be peacemakers, his mission does not bring peace but a sword, so long as the powers of our communities, societies and world resist God's rule and will. The very act of peacemaking, as Jesus' ministry demonstrates, generates violence for healing, restoration and the conquest of death, threaten the foundations of all human assertions of power in defiance of God. And of course, Jesus lets the disciples know that whatever happens, God knows and cares for them. Aren't 2 sparrows sold for an Assyrian coin? God cares even about tiny sparrows, birds that become in this verse a symbol of inconsequential value. Some translations use the word penny for this coin. As a consequence, many understand this verse to mean that a sparrow in Jesus' time was almost worthless. An Assyrian, however, is a copper coin worth around 1/10 to 1/16 of a denarius. A denarius is a day's wage for a labourer. So it therefore represents between a value of 1/10 to 1/16 the amount required to sustain a family at a subsistence level with food, clothing and shelter for one day. The sparrows have value. And yet not one of them falls to the ground dead apart from your Father's will. That is, none of them fall to the ground dead without the Father's knowledge or without his consent. Here, Jesus tells us that our Heavenly Father knows and cares about each of the millions of sparrows that populate the planet and will eventually die and fall to the ground. The God who cares for a small bird also cares about the small things of our lives, even the very hairs on our head. Jesus argues from the lesser to the greater. If the Father cares about a sparrow, which has a lower value, will he not care much more for humans who are of more value than many sparrows? However, this love and acceptance given and shown to the disciples, and by extension to us, is not a promise that God will not allow the disciples to suffer. Jesus' requirement to take his cross proves that. Taking up the cross implies identification with the marginal people, who in Jesus' day were slaves, possibly rebels, the broken and destitute, who were subject to Roman crucifixion because they did not always align themselves with or submit themselves to Rome's or other oppressive authorities. But Jesus promises that those who lose their life for him will in fact find it, while those who find their lives in the world will lose them. The answers to fear, then, include clear-eyed recognition of the disguises of human power, even those rooted in the threat of death, awareness of the conflict and division the gospel inevitably produces, and especially the deep awareness and conviction that God is present in the world, in mercy and compassion. As Christ's followers today, and as disciples to his disciples, we are called out of our comfort zones, to rise above our fears and anxieties, reach out to the lost, to the marginalised and silenced in our communities, and proclaim the love that God has for us and for them, regardless of what the world may throw at us. Amen.